The United Nations celebrates the 73rd anniversary of the start of peacekeeping missions. We will take a look at that. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Anand and Naidoo, and this is The Heat. On May 29, 1948, the United Nations created the peace operations, dedicated to helping nations navigate from conflict to peace. This week, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres laid a wreath at the Peacekeepers Memorial to honor the more than 4,000 women and men who have lost their lives while serving under the blue flag. From the 1940s to today, the threats have changed and the organization has had to adapt to new challenges. Earlier, Anand Naidoo spoke with the UN Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Pierre Lacroix. Let's take a look and listen.
Monsieur Pierre Lacroix, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yours is one of the most important and challenging jobs at the United Nations, keeping the peace in conflict zones around the world. But of course, we have an added challenge right now, and that is the COVID pandemic, which has swept across the globe. How has the pandemic impacted the ability of the United Nations peacekeepers to do their job around the world?
Well, indeed, COVID-19 has had a serious impact on both the countries in which we operate as well as our own missions. At the same time, and thanks to the efforts that we made collectively with our troop contributing countries, our member states, and our colleagues in the field, we have been able to continue delivering on our mandates, and despite the challenges from COVID-19. Now, the good news is that we started providing the vaccine to our colleagues in the field, and I hope that will, of course, help us a lot. But the time has not come yet to ease the preventative measures that we took. Another thing that I would like to say on COVID-19 is that our missions have helped local communities as well as host countries in their response against COVID-19, and we continue to do this in various ways. One of them is to sensitize the population to the risk of COVID-19, the need for preventive measures. We use our media to do this. And another way of helping, of course, is to provide support in terms of organizing the response, and also in terms of providing some equipment and some consumable products, which we did in several missions. And finally, we are also looking at what the long-term consequences of COVID-19 could be on our host countries, on their communities. And of course, this is something that worries us because, as we know, COVID-19 is having a serious impact on people, on the economy, and of course that can have an impact as well regarding political situation, as well as the security situation in the countries where we're operating.
And in terms of peacekeeping operations right now, what are the challenges, the biggest challenges that you face? I mean, what are the flashpoints around the globe that concern you?
Well, I think the biggest challenges really are, first of all, that we're there to support political efforts and durable political solutions, and these solutions are not forthcoming. They're not coming fast enough. And I think that this is a key area where we need increased support from our member states and from all the partners that can help us in the various situations in which we are involved. So this is really one of the key challenges. Now, another very significant challenge for us is the fact that many of the environments in which we are operating have become much more dangerous to the people, but also to our colleagues in the field. And we're seeing this through the many incidents that our colleagues are confronted with, the attacks by armed groups, the use of improvised explosive devices, and And of course, this is also compounded by the fact that these are environments where other threats, such as various illnesses, the bad traffic conditions, can also have an impact on the security of our peacekeepers. So this is a second challenge. And I would say that maybe the third challenge has to do with the fact that in many of our missions, we have large number of vulnerable population to protect, and we consider that as one of our major duties. But at the same time, it is challenging because we're protecting every day hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, and this raises, of course, very high expectations, which are not always very easy to meet, but it also poses a number of challenges.
Now, the theme for this year's International Day of UN Peacekeepers calls for, and I'm quoting here, leveraging the power of youth for peace and security. Can you explain the theme, and why is it important to focus of youth in the context of peacekeeping?
I think this theme is extremely important and extremely relevant. Why? First of all, because we are active in countries where the majority of the population are young. And we're working with them, and we're working to make sure that they will have a better future. So it is, I believe, extremely important to have that focus on youth, and to make sure that young people will be part of our collective efforts to bring about more stability and a better future. After all, as I say, it's about their future. That is why our missions in the field do their best efforts to involve communities, and particularly young people in those communities, in efforts aimed at promoting peace and promoting dialogue, and making sure that, as I say, we prepare conditions for peace to be achieved, and also a better condition for young people to envisage their future.
Okay, I want to talk for a moment about China's involvement in UN peacekeeping operations. China, of course, has invested much diplomatically, politically, and financially in the United Nations, in global governance, and is a strong advocate of multilateralism. How would you assess China's role in and its contribution to UN peacekeeping operations?
Well, I think we were very fortunate to have very strong support from China on many accounts. First of all, China is the second largest financial contributor to peacekeeping. It is also one of the biggest, 10 biggest contributors of uniformed personnel. But in addition to that, we're seeing a strong involvement in helping us to improve the impact and the effectiveness of peacekeeping missions. And I think this is hugely important. I would like to highlight the fact that China has now taken the lead on the very important team that is safety and security of our peacekeepers. China was instrumental in the adoption of the resolution of the Security Council on that team, and it has also been and the origin of this group of friends, so-called group of friends of member states involved and interested in this theme of safety and security of our peacekeepers. And I also note that with China having the presidency of the Security Council for this month, we will be given the opportunity to brief the Security Council on our efforts regarding safety and security of our peacekeepers. So this is just an important example, really, of China's involvement in and support to our peacekeeping mission, and we highly appreciate that. And I would also like to stress that the quality of service of Chinese men and women in uniform in our mission is really exceptional. I've had many occasions to highlight this with my Chinese interlocutors, and this is, of course, very valuable to us.
You know, we've been talking about the challenges that UN peacekeeping operations faces around the world, but this is an agency of the United Nations which has been an integral part of the UN for more than 70 years. What would you consider the major successes of UN peacekeeping over the decades?
Well, I think, first of all, if we look at the number of countries that have been helped by peacekeeping in their path towards more stability and a peaceful future, then that list is quite long. And I could name Cambodia, Angola, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, El Salvador, and many other countries. So that is really to sort of highlight peacekeeping's achievements in the recent decades. But in addition to that, and in spite of all the difficulties, peacekeeping today plays a major role in several areas. First of all, preventive role, preventing the resumption of conflict. And if we look at missions deployed, for example, in southern Lebanon or in Cyprus, they play an essential role in making sure that ceasefire will be respected and that hostilities will not resume, and that if any incident occur between the parties, then that incident will not escalate. And I think this is a major role, as I say, in preventing the outbursts of violence and resumption of conflicts. Now, the second key added value that I see is that our peacekeepers, both civilian police and as well, and military as well, protect every day. They protect hundreds of thousands of people. So it's a major role that our peacekeepers play in protecting civilians, and at the same time, it comes with many challenges. So I would say that this is really the major areas where I believe there is a strong added value brought by peacekeeping operations.
I have one final question, and this is an idea that's been floating around mainly in the media and among think tanks around the world, and that is about the conflict in Afghanistan. We all, of course, know that the United States will be pulling its troops out by September 11th. There has been suggestions of a UN peacekeeping mission to fill in the vacuum that might bring. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, in order for peacekeeping operations to be created and deployed, there is a need for a decision by the UN Security Council. So there would have to be an agreement by the UN Security Council as to the need for such a peacekeeping operation, as well as on its mandate. So that would be the first condition. I think another very important element is that in order for a peacekeeping mission to have the conditions for its deployment and for the delivery of its mandate, there has to be the consent of the key parties involved in a given situation. Because otherwise it's extremely difficult to envisage the possibility for our missions to make a difference. So I would say that these would be the two major elements, I believe, when it comes to any additional peacekeeping mission, but that would certainly be valid for Afghanistan.
Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And a lot of information there. We're going to continue our discussion on the UN peacekeeping operations. Let's bring in our panelists now. From Beijing, Zhou, he is a senior fellow at Tsinghua University. Here in Washington, D.C., Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, he is an Africa security and policy analyst. And Saeed is a lecturer in the history department at Wayne State University and joins us from the lovely city of Detroit. Been there many times. We had a chance to listen to what the UN Undersecretary for Peace Operations had to say. Saeed, I want to start with you. They're really recognizing, honoring, if you will, 73 years of peacekeeping missions, but some have been characterized by controversy and varying degrees of success. Kind of help us put this in perspective. Give us your take on how effective this has been over the past 7+ decades.
Well, I think it's really difficult to go ahead and calculate the positive impact of the UN peacekeeping. I mean, we're talking about over 1 million people deployed in 72 different operations. Currently, there's roughly about 90 to 100,000 deployed in 12 operations. So 1/6 of all operations are actually still active right now. And despite the fact that 4,000 people have lost their lives in this noble effort, I think that there's certainly a net positive. Now, at the same time, and this is where it becomes very difficult when it's a matter of trust and trust building. The Blue Helmet is, on the one hand, internationally recognized as being a force of good, diplomacy, humanitarian aid, peacekeeping. But unfortunately, because of some of the scandals, the more egregious ones, of course, are Srebrenica in the 1990s with the Dutch peacekeepers and the massacre of Bosnian Muslim men and boys. And then, of course, the issue of sexual abuse in cases like Haiti, Bosnia, Kosovo, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Mozambique, Central African Republic, and the very specter of sex trafficking being associated with not just peacekeeping forces, but with the United Nations. Those are more than just mere blemishes. And while the United Nations has certainly addressed these issues and tried to rectify them, the long-term impact of that in the populations and the societies that are seeking to be served and are so desperate, that is the real issue and the real challenge moving forward.
Abdullahi, if I can get you to pick up on that, we're talking about 12 current operations going on. Many of them are going on in the continent of Africa. Kind of tell us how important these missions are to the continent right now and what positives you believe can be taken away from this.
Thank you. I think I would want to agree with the previous speaker, Mr. Khan, that, it is a very long operation. It's gone on for several years now, and the bulk of these mostly take part in the African continent. But even within the African continent, I think we've got to acknowledge that there have been good things that have been done. I mean, if you look at the entire budget of the UN peacekeeping operation, that is like 7-8 billion. That is less than 1% of the United States budget. And if you go through some of the peacekeeping operations, some of them are they can be argued to have been qualified success. You speaking about Mozambique, Burundi, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone. All these countries are better off because of the UN peacekeeping operation. But if you look at peacekeeping operation, for instance, the one that is taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's the largest and probably the most expensive UN peacekeeping operations. Some of the issues that the colleague before me mentioned are very inherent. You have question around, sexual abuse. DRC is still not stable as we speak now, and so I think it's going to be very, very difficult. So I think again, it's a question of taking the good with the bad, and also acknowledging that the terrain where the peacekeeping operation takes place has completely shifted, not just over the last 76 years of the peacekeeping operations, but also within even the last decades now, where peacekeeping operations are taking a more proactive steps in trying to enforce the peace. But in places where there is no peace, what do they enforce?
Zhou, we heard Anand in that excellent interview with Mr. Lacroix talk about what the UN thinks about China's large involvement in these peacekeeping operations, and he also went on to point out that this strong involvement has improved the impact of peacekeeping missions. So we know what the UN thinks of China's involvement. Tell us what China thinks about its involvement in these peacekeeping efforts.
Well, China certainly consider its involvement in peacekeeping is most important, not only for her self-image, but also for the peace and stability of the world as a whole, because China is a major power, and because of the fact that it is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Therefore, China has indispensable responsibilities for the well-being of others. So that is why since 1990, China has sent about 40,000 peacekeepers on 25 missions. Most of them are in Africa. So this is China's contribution. But China really has something unique, because I believe China is the only country that has combined political will, excellent manpower, and quality equipment. Let me explain this. If you look at some of the developing countries, they have strong wills to be involved in peacekeeping, but they do not necessarily have good equipment, and actually they buy equipment from China. And some of these people, a very small handful of the people, are involved in sexual abuses, for example. But when we come to developed countries, you would find that most developed countries would give ideas about how peacekeeping should be done, so on and so forth. But the physical involvement in terms of number of people in peacekeeping are really, really limited. So China has good equipment, strong political will, and excellent manpower. So that is why China can play a good role.
Abdullahi, I think if you look at what's going on in Darfur, really it has been one of the largest and most costly drains on peacekeeping troops ever deployed. But the mandate was terminated in December, and it really kind of shows this struggle that goes on because, of course, the criticism are that blue helmets left too soon, leaving a vacuum in that area and really pushed out in large part by the civilian military transition government. How difficult is it really to strike some kind of balance, to go in and leave an area that is under conflict better off than it is now, especially considering what the Undersecretary for Peace Operations said just a moment ago? So many of the people in the countries they go to are very young.
And that is at the heart. How do you strike a happy balance, leaving the country better than you found? I just want to step back a little bit and say that a lot of the peacekeeping operation at the UN level is largely a political process. Political process in the sense that there are many competing geostrategic interests for the deployment, for the extension of the mandate, and for the renewal of the mandate, and for also ending of the mandate. So it just shows you that there are so many factors at play. And to the Undersecretary's comments about younger population, I think than any other region in the world, Africa has one of the youngest population, with median age of 17 and mean age of 19. And what that does is, this is the population. If the economies are not growing enough to be absorbed into the economy and into the economy, both private and the government employment services, they'll become fairly susceptible to being recruited to join, military armed groups or even transnational groups. And so that becomes an incredibly difficult thing. For the UN, a lot of the time, I understand, that they face tremendous amount of, criticism. But I think there is also a place for the argument that most of the countries that fund the UN peacekeeping operations are largely Western countries. They give money to equipment and advice and stuff. But majority, again, of the peacekeeping operation, the rank and file are largely from, developed countries, and significant chunk of that are African countries. So it becomes a really difficult balance to strike. But it's never easy to wind down a peacekeeping operation, right, especially when the conflict is ongoing.
Yeah, indeed. I think the United States is coping with that right now. After 20 plus years in Afghanistan, the U.S. troops are set to pull out by September 13th. And a lot of people are concerned there's going to be a huge vacuum there, perhaps triggering another civil war, undoing all the good that has been done for women and girls in that country. Saeed, I want to ask you, moving into that area, because we heard the Undersecretary, again, for Peace Operations talk about the concern about a vacuum. But he also seemed to indicate this isn't something the UN wants to wade into, certainly not without a lot of discussion. Your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is something the United Nations really should take a look at? And do you think it could happen?
Well, I like what Mr. Lacroix had to say regarding the challenges that are facing this particular issue. And if I may just point a bit of clarification, the United States has actually been there not just for 20 years, but for 42 years with its involvement in the Afghan war against the Soviet Union. And I think therein lies one of the big issues that we find, that complicity of many of the members of the UN Security Council, the permanent members, particularly Russia, the US, Great Britain, and France, and the colonial legacy that they have left behind in places like Africa and Asia, to which then the UN has to come in and play a role. In the case of Afghanistan, I would certainly agree with Mr. Lacroix that unless and until there is some major buy-in, not only from the various parties of Afghanistan, but also regional actors, I think it's very critical that there be concentric circles as a model in trying to then bring some level of stability, because as we have seen before, unfortunately, the peacekeepers are on the front line of a political dilemma that is not being solved either at the UN or by the very parties that are involved on the ground. If there is going to be any kind of cooperation, then there has to be collaboration and there has to be some coordination that's involved. So I would actually argue that it's going to require China, Pakistan, Iran, and others in order to provide some kind of buttressing for the situation of Afghanistan. Now, China has, of course, done a very good job in the region with its economic expansion, with its cooperation deals with Pakistan, and as a result of it, they're stakeholders. They're investors in a project that does not want to then see destabilization or any kind of further dismantling of the kind of stability that's needed, both for economic reasons and for humanitarian reasons.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Joe, I'd like to bring you in on that, because if you just read the Western media, watch Western accounts, you really don't get the sense of all China is doing in Afghanistan. Talk to me about that and where you think that could go in the future. To what degree, in terms of working with the United Nations, could China play a significant role on trying to keep that area as peaceful as possible?
Well, I think in Afghanistan, we are really witnessing the forever war launched by the United States. So China's policy toward Afghanistan is to have a peaceful development in Afghanistan. So all the parties should come to talks to find a way out. Therefore, we definitely would be interested in the construction after the war. As to what Mr. Lacroix has mentioned, there are two preconditions for peacekeeping missions to be involved. Actually, it might not be possible in that, although it needs the consent of the parties and the agreement of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, we cannot presume hypothetically that definitely we're going to have a conflict situation there, which requires all the parties to request the UN peacekeeping, to request UN Security Council. We hope for the best, but we'll see how the situation might turn out. Since China is a direct neighbor of Afghanistan, so we'll try our best to help this country, but in a way different from the previous practice of the Western countries, including the United States.
Gentlemen, we could talk about this a long time, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C. The news continues. Gerald Tan coming up next.